Welcome back, everyone. Tonight we're going to read this magazine about the history of the Vikings, masters of terror and trade. I've always been very fascinated about the Vikings, especially since I am Swedish myself. It's always when it's your own people, your ancestors. It's even more fascinating to learn. What's different, what's similar to today's people, and try to see how did they live. Where do you come from? It's something that's very satisfying to learn about, I feel. But I know that the Vikings fascinate more than just modern day Scandinavians. That's why I thought I would read this tonight. So without further ado, why not get started? Age of the Norsemen. When Harald Hardrada took an arrow to the throat near York in 1066, it signaled the end of the Viking Age. Chronicles of the time spoke of how the Norse warriors had plundered, murdered, and raped their way through Europe for 3 centuries. For long years, these ancient texts were our best source of knowledge about the Viking era, but now archaeological finds and studies have painted a more nuanced picture. Thousands of young men may have set out on raids, and powerful chieftains undoubtedly subdued vast areas of land. But the Vikings were first and foremost traders. Their sleek ships ruled the world's oceans, and trading towns sprang up in Scandinavia, where merchants sold goods from all over the known world. The quest for land and luxury drove the Norse further and further east and west, until they had charted the rivers of what is now Russia, and landed on the vast continent we would come to know as America. I remember that the first time I learned that the Vikings had arrived in what is today Canada, I think. Was it Newfoundland or Nova Scotia, I think? I had never heard of that before. I've known it for years now, but it was fairly late that I heard about it, and it sounded like fiction to me at first. But it's very interesting. I really like this magazine. I haven't read all of it, obviously. Oh, sorry about that. I haven't read all of it. I've looked through it a little bit. I really like this style of history content. What do you call it? It's it goes in depth without being too much, if you know what I mean. These 1,000-page books. Okay, maybe not 1,000 pages, but these thick books with there's no extra fluff, if you know what I mean. There's no pictures, there's no little small little text boxes or interesting facts like this. Just boom. And that has its uses too. But I feel like this sort of magazine like this, for example, is a lot more accessible for your everyday people to learn more about history. Oh, it's Sweden, my country. Well, I'm not the ruler of Sweden, but it's let's see here. Sweden. Birka is founded AD 800. In the early 9th century, Swedish Vikings founded one of the most important trading towns of the time, Birka, or Birka, as I was trying to say it more how I would say it in Swedish. It feels weird to say it in English. Goods are loaded and unloaded from jetties in its harbor on the island of Björka, west of Stockholm. The town is a hub for trading slaves and furs from Rus, luxury goods from Byzantium, and silver coins from the Arab empires. In the town's workshops, craftsmen make jewelry and craft amber into beads and amulets, which they sell at the big winter markets in February, where the guaranteed snow and ice also ensures that warm luxury slippers are in high demand. Emigration east. 850. In search of pastures new, Swedish Vikings attack and conquer trading posts along the Volkhov River and around Lake Ladoga in what is now northeastern Russia. Slowly they established the Gardarike, the kingdom of the Rus, that over the following centuries will expand east and south from Finland's southern border to the Black Sea and deep into Ukraine. In 862, the Viking chieftain Rurik settles in Ladoga before moving his capital further south to a site near Novgorod. The city quickly becomes the Viking capital and a major trading center, from where in 907 they first attack and then negotiate a trade treaty with the Byzantine Empire. I think the origin of the name for Russia is, well, it's debated, but it's either that they originated from an area in Sweden called Roslagen, which eventually became Rus, and then Russia, Russia, and it's that's the area. That's my hometown is actually from. It's around that area in Roslagen, which I find very cool. And when you read about the origin of what is today Russia, I know it's a bit disputed. I know in the Soviet times it was called like some fringe theory, and you know you don't want to tell the history about your big strong country that your people came from like Scandinavia. It doesn't really fit with the image, but I think a lot of historians today agree that it was Swedes that formed what was the precursor to modern day Russia, which is very fascinating to me. Another theory I know is that Russia, the name for Russia, comes from, or it has origins in the Finnish word for Sweden, which is Ruotsi. Yeah, I'm not sure which one it is, but I know that's one of the theories. Let's continue here. First Swedish king, 994. In 994, the Christian Olof okay, I was confused there for a second. In 994, why is it called the? That sounded weird. The Christian Olof Konung, tributary king, becomes Sweden's first king, ruling over both the Goths along the country's west coast, Götar, it's called in Swedish, and the Swedes, the Svear, who gave Sweden its name. Around 995, Olof begins minting coins bearing his name and title, as well as images of Christian crosses, in the trading town of Sigtuna, not far from Birka. Like other Norse kings, he's inspired by the coinage of the English king Aethelred, who is paying huge amounts of silver coins, Danegeld, to the Vikings in an unsuccessful attempt to put an end to their ravaging and plundering of those areas of England not already under direct Danish rule. Swedes become Christians. 1008. The missionary Ansgar, who later becomes Archbishop of Hamburg-Bremen, travels to Sweden and Birka in 829 to preach the new faith. He is allowed to spread the religion and builds the country's first church in Birka, as well as other churches across Sweden. Over the next 200 years or so, Christianity slowly gains ground. The Swedes began to practice completely new rituals and rules of life. They go to church, receive baptism, and refrain from worshipping the old gods, having children out of wedlock and marrying relatives, even distant ones. By the early 12th century, most Swedes have converted to Christianity. I'm pretty sure the Swedes were the last ones of the Scandinavians to convert to Christianity. It took the longest, if I'm not mistaken. Denmark. Vikings rampage. 793 AD. On 8th June 793, Vikings attacked a monastery on Lindisfarne, a small island off the Northumbrian coast. The historic attack traditionally marks the beginning of the Viking Age. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle refers to the ravaging pagans as Danes, a term that, like the word Norse, generally refers to all Scandinavians. The earliest Vikings are from Norway, but later Danish Vikings are the primary plunderers of England. After the attack, Christian scholars preached that the English must lead a good life to avoid the divine punishment that must have triggered the Viking attacks. Trade in Hedeby, 808. An ongoing threat. Seems like ongoing threat from the Franks is fine. Ongoing. Alright. Ongoing threat from the Franks is finally repelled, once and for all, in 808, when the Danish king Gudfred destroys the Frankish trading post of Rerik near the German Baltic city of Wismar. Gudfred moves the merchants 150 kilometers northwest to Hedeby, ideally placed as a hub for Baltic trade, and with connections as far as Arabia. From here, Gudfred is able to collect taxes in return for guaranteeing the safety of trade in the Baltic, the North Sea, and along European rivers. This helps establishing Denmark as the strongest economic power among the three Nordic kingdoms formed during the Viking Age. Vikings leave their mark, 850. The first Vikings initially settle on the islands at the mouth of the Thames, where they spend the winter in 850. Over the next couple of centuries, they established Jarvik, York, as their key stronghold and merchant town in the Danelaw, the Viking-controlled part of England, as well as making it the country's second largest city with around 15,000 inhabitants. There, they established their own written laws and courts with juries, which later provide the basis of modern European and American law. That's interesting, I didn't know that. The Vikings leave other marks too. Place names ending in by, Thorpe, or Thwaite, for example, also bear witness to their presence. I think like Grimsby, it's one example I can think of. Scunthorpe is another, I think. Danes become Christians, 936. In 936, Gorm the Old becomes king of Denmark. He reinforces the Jutlandic defensive fortress Danevirke. I was confused if I was going to say that in like more native pronunciation or English. Virke. I don't know. It's like Dane is English, but Virke is a Scandinavian word. That's confusing. When he dies in 958, his son Harald Bluetooth acceds to the throne and erects the Great Yelling Stone with the inscription, "Harold, who won for himself all of Denmark and belief in the Norse gods still thrives, and Odin, Thor, and Freya continue to be worshipped for generations. However, most Danes are Christians by around the year 1000. And the last one of these introductions to the countries, Norway. Norway is united 870 AD. At the beginning of the Viking Age, Norway is divided into multiple chiefdoms and petty kingdoms. But in 870, Harald Fairhair, king of Vestfold in Norway, begins to unite the country into a single kingdom. At the Battle of Hafrsfjord near Stavanger, he defeats at least 8 minor kings from the southwest, including Agder and Telemark. The battle probably takes place around 872 or during the 880s. Harald Fairhair has traditionally been credited with uniting the whole of Norway, but modern historians believe that he only united southernmost Norway and its coastal areas. Voyages of Discovery, 870. During a storm in around 860, 2 ships heading for the Faroe Islands and the Hebrides, how do you pronounce that? Hebrides, I think, respectively, are knocked off course and arrive in Iceland instead. The Norwegian Ingolfur Arnarsson and his brother Leif became the first permanent settlers on the uninhabited island in 870. Around 100 years later, Eric the Red is exiled from Iceland. He voyages to Greenland to set up a colony with an entourage of 25 ships from Iceland. But only 14 ships survive the journey. Around 1000, his son Leif Erikson, the Lucky, follows in his father's footsteps and is credited with discovering Vinland, modern-day North America. Battle of Norway, 1000. Norway's king, Olaf Tryggvason, rebels against the Danish king, but is defeated by an alliance between Denmark's king Sven Forkbeard and the Swedish king Olof Skötkonung. Norway is then left without a king, but after years as a Viking raider, the Norwegian Olaf Haraldsson returns to rule the country, displacing the vassal rulers of Danish king Knut the Great and becoming King Olaf II. He forcibly converts the Norwegians to Christianity, which later earns him the moniker Olaf the Holy. However, after being deposed in 1028, he is killed in 1030 trying to reclaim the throne in the Battle of Stiklestad near Trondheim. 1045, Vikings lose England. Olaf's half-brother, Harald Hardrada, fights alongside Olaf at Stiklestad when he is 15. In 1045 he returns to Norway with great riches after years of service with the Byzantine Emperor's elite force, the Varangian Guards. Harald is installed as king in 1047 and fights against the Danish king for over 20 years, but gives up attempting to subjugate Denmark in 1064. Instead, he travels to England to fight and defeat King Harold Godwinson in an attempt to claim the English crown, but during the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 is hit by an arrow in the throat and dies. The Viking Age officially ends with his defeat in England. Let's read a little bit about the Norse gods. It's a topic I've been especially interested in lately, and I hope you will find it interesting as well. The Norse gods. The Viking world of gods was full of superstition and rituals. The sacrifice of boars and stallions ensured a good harvest, while amulets protected against storms and unknown dangers. But despite the Vikings' everyday concerns, every warrior dreamed of the same thing: to die an honorable death and end up in Valhalla, the Hall of the Gods, where there was an endless supply of meat and pork. This picture here, Ash Yggdrasil. The sacred tree was surrounded by the 9 worlds that the Vikings believed existed, including Midgard of men and Asgard of the gods. This is a cool picture here. Yggdrasil. Heimdall, the guardian of the gods and the rainbow bridge, Bifrost. Heimdall could see for 100 leagues and hear the grass grow. If giants came, he blew the Gjallar horn to warn the gods. This picture of Thor here. Thor, with his formidable physique, the god of thunder, was the strongest and most admired of the gods. He fiercely defended Asgard and Midgard from the giants and was also considered a protector of travelers. According to Viking mythology, humans lived in Midgard, the middle world. It was surrounded by a wall that separated it from the chaotic Utgard of the giants. Freyja, the goddess of love, watched over fertility, birth, and death. She haunted the battlefields and shared the dead warriors with Odin. They then took up residence in her hall, Folkvanger. Freyr, Freyja's twin brother, Frey. Yeah, I said it in English with Freyr, but it's in Swedish at least you just say Frey. Freyja's twin brother Frey was also the god of fertility. At the winter solstice, the Vikings sacrificed stallions or boars to him for a good harvest. Mjolnir, Thor's mighty hammer, Mjolnir, always returned to the god's hand. The Vikings wore a small amulet in the shape of the hammer to provide protection against storms and other dangers. You see Thor's hammer here. It's a really cool sort of symbol. It's, yeah, it just looks kind of powerful, doesn't it? The most important gods, belief in gods and giants, permeated Viking life. They were convinced, for example, that Thor really rode across the sky in his chariot and spread lightning and thunder. Before the Vikings went to war, they made offerings to Odin, the mightiest of the gods, while stallions and boars had to die to satisfy the fertility god Frey and ensure next year's harvest. Odin was the most feared god. He was worshipped for 9 days every 9 years, with 9 sacrificial animals of each species. I don't know what non-specific species, I don't know if it's something, if it had to be like a certain species, I don't know. The enormous giants, or jättar, I don't know if it's called jättar in Swedish. The enormous giants were considered stupid and ugly, yet terrifying. Cunning Loki Loke had a giant for a father, but became Odin's blood brother and moved to Asgard. On the battlefield, before a battle, the Viking leader rode forward and threw his spear over the heads of his opponents, shouting, "Odin, take them all." The words dedicated the fallen enemies as sacrifices to Odin, whose weapon was the magical spear Gungnir. Dishonor. A Viking who died in his bed was condemned to languish for eternity in the netherworld of Hel, a cold, dark underworld. So I guess too, kind of shows that, sort of a warrior culture, yeah, which I find it's so fascinating how a lot of their lifestyle is centered around this belief in the afterlife, and you know, when dying in your bed is considered like weak, I feel that's a testament to their warrior-centric sort of culture, which I find very, very cool. It's, yeah. It's a Valkyrie right here. Valkyrie. The name means chooser of the slain. That sounds badass. I mean, it really does. According to myth, the Valkyries brought heroic dead warriors on horseback from the battlefield to Odin's hall, Valhalla. There's a rune stone. Gravestones. The Vikings honored their dead with rune stones. This gravestone with rune inscriptions dates from around 1030 AD and was found in London. Funeral. A dead chieftain would be burned on his ship, along with supplies and weapons to send him straight to the next world. After, his survivors would build a burial mound in his memory. The way to the afterlife. Vikings wanted to die honorably on the battlefield, so they would be taken to Odin's hall, Valhalla. They were given animals, weapons, servants, food, and drink to take to the grave, possessions they'd need in the afterlife. Much loved folk were buried near their homes in the hope that they would protect those left behind, while rogues were buried somewhere remote for fear that they would haunt the living. They were even given servants. I'm pretty sure you would feel a little pissed off if you were chosen as a servant for some dead warrior to follow them into the afterlife. You're like, okay, I guess this is my fate now. Packed lunch. Vikings believed they lived on in the afterlife. Therefore, the dead were given food and drink for their journey. I feel this is this sort of thing, giving the dead things that they might need in the afterlife, burying them with supplies and things like that. I feel like that's it's pretty universal across cultures. I mean, not all cultures, obviously, but I feel like when you read about different cultures around the world, old ones, some sort of belief in the afterlife, you can often see this sort of thing, which I feel that's I like when you can tell, people from, cultures from other side of the globe, but they still have like similar characteristics in certain ways. I feel like you really see what's the humanness, I guess, of that. There are certain things that we all share, which I feel it's yeah, I just find that fascinating. Like seeing things that are intrinsically human, if that's the right word. I think, if you know what I mean, yeah. Viking women were buried with their jewelry and household items, as the Vikings believed they'd need them in the next life. Warriors were given weapons and helmets to fight the giants at Ragnarok. Dogs, cows, chickens, horses, and even servants were killed and put in the grave to travel with the dead. Poor servants. Oh, poor animals too, but I really like these pictures. It's very I really like the layout of this magazine. Odin's heroes. For every Viking, the goal was to gain access to the omniscient and feared Odin and his hall Valhalla. Vikings would rather sacrifice their own lives to Odin than surrender to the enemy. Valhalla's gates. According to the sagas, Valhalla had 540 gates, each so large that 800 men could pass through at once, side by side. Life in Valhalla. The fallen warriors brought by the Valkyrie to Odin's hall Valhalla were called Einherjar. Here they were destined to fight on the side of the gods against the giants at the end of the world, Ragnarok. Every day, the heroes fought each other. When evening fell, their wounds healed, and they were ready to eat and drink late into the night, with endless amounts of meat and meat, and skaldic tales of the good old days. That sounds like a very chill time. I don't know, I just like the way they phrased that. It sounded pretty chill, to be honest. Hero's death. Only warriors who excelled in battle or died in a holmgång, a duel between two men, were chosen by Odin to enter Valhalla. Snorri's Edda. Norse mythology was retold by the Icelandic author Snorri Sturluson in about 1220 AD. Yeah, I think this is where like the bulk of Nordic mythology comes from. It's from Snorri Sturluson. There wasn't a lot of written accounts left by the Vikings themselves. It was a lot of what we know today is just based on his works, which and when it comes to sources is kind of a problem, because a lot of it is just from his writings, but I think historians agree that it's trustworthy. But yeah, it's interesting that there's not a whole lot of different sources when it comes to the Viking Age, which is important to keep in mind, I guess. That well, I forgot what I was going to say there, but let's just continue. Ragnarok. In the story of the Viking apocalypse, Thor kills the Midgard serpent, but dies from its poison. That will be it for tonight. I will come back to this at a later point. Read a little bit more about other aspects of Viking history. But I hope you found this video relaxing and that you learned something from it. I know I did. I mean, there's so much about the Viking Age to just... You can really dive deep about very specific topics if you want, or even just the general history. There's so much to learn. Very fascinating age.